Hi, this is Paul. Currently in No Wait No Ads, there's a conversation between myself and Nate DeYoung McCarran about Better Together, which is a new project that is within the Christian Reformed Church, but not necessarily limited to the Christian Reformed Church. This project grew out of the conflict over the Human Sexuality Report and same-sex marriage in the Christian Reformed Church. I'm going to play a clip of that in a little bit. The entire conversation is in No Wait No Ads. So before I do that, let me explain a few things. Why do I put conversations in No Wait No Ads? Number one, some of you are impatient and always want to see something right away. So it's there for you. You just have to pay $7 a month to see it. Number two, why not just post it on the channel right away when you're going to post a clip on the channel right away? Because I watch the analytics. And if I just post this guy with this conversation on this channel right now without any context, it won't get seen very well. So I do smaller clips to get people ready to do it. Number three, some of you watch everything I put out the first day I put it out. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. Many people do not, especially when I deal with denominational things. These things filter far more slowly through the denomination than they do just on my YouTube channel and some of you who watch a lot of YouTube for a whole variety of reasons. So this is a clip from that conversation. And in this, well, let me say a couple of things about Better Together and about the conversation. Again, if you want to watch it, for those of you who know very little about YouTube, and the membership stuff is unusual, there is a join button. You can see it right here on this screen that if you press, and then if you're logged into YouTube and you can put a credit card on file, then you can join the membership of the channel and see it right away. I'm not doing this to grift or to try to get your money because it's going to be out for free in a few days. But there's no ads on it in the membership section, so you don't have to deal with that. A lot of people who are regular YouTube users like myself, I have YouTube Premium, so I never see ads anyway. But there's different levels of membership. Why would I have a membership to my channel? Number one, the Randos level of membership has a lot of things in it that certain people didn't want out on the open internet, but they were willing to have it just within the confines of the few hundred people that actually pay very close attention to that stuff. So there's that kind of stuff in there. I started No Wait No Ads at a different level because, again, every time I would say I talk to someone, people get itchy about seeing it right away, and I got tired about explaining why I lay it out, so that's for you. Unsubscribe next month. If you really got to see it now and you don't want that on your credit card, I will take no offense. So that's where this is at. Now, Better Together has had an evolution and quite in the CRC. It was announced a little while ago that they got a grant from the Lilly Foundation of over $1 million. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what, let's say, what started as sort of a special interest or an agenda-driven group, which was birthed out of Grand Rapids East, so a lot of people had suspicions about it, what on earth they would do with $1 million. I get that question answered in this video, which is good. What do they do with it? They're basically starting a whole project similar to some of the other projects that I had been working on. It's sort of a parallel to the denomination project, and he lays it out quite well. Nate is the director of this new project, which will last for 3 years. And if you're at all familiar with the kinds of projects that the Lilly Foundation supports with denominations, this project won't be a surprise at all. And even though it began out of this conflict and is in some ways motivated by some of what's going on behind the scenes of this conflict, this won't really necessarily impact the way this conflict rolls out in the Christian Reformed Church, partly because of just where we are today and how much speed this thing has taken on. Now, before I play the clip, I also want to mention something else that I've looked at before, is brought to my attention, and today I dug into it a little bit more deeply. So most of you know about Substack, and someone has been writing, Kent Hendricks, has been writing pieces on Substack about the Christian Reformed Church for a while now. And he's covering some of the same things that I have covered. In fact, today he did a really beautiful write-up of the CRC circulatory system, which is something that I had talked about, and that language is probably original to me, and he credits me for it. But a really beautiful write-up, the kind of write-up that I've just not taken the time to sort of carefully write it and edit it. And he just does a lovely job with laying it out. I will leave links to his Substack and to some of these postings on it. He also had a great piece dated the 6th of May, No, the Left Did Not Filibuster at Synod. Now, I remember last year covering the 2023 Synod, and a number of people from this little corner were telling me, the left is filibustering, they're filibustering, that's clearly what they're doing. And I thought, I don't know about that. And what he does is really nicely break down how long people spoke. Now, the minority always talks more at a meeting like this because the majority sort of has a sense that they're on the winning side, so they don't necessarily have a lot to say. He gets into some of the leadership of Synod, Paul de Vries, some of the decisions Paul de Vries made and announced, and the way he did it. And so again, it's a really terrific piece. And so if you're sort of interested in the CRC Synod stuff, whether or not you're in the Christian Reformed Church and you're sort of wonky about it, he's got a lot of good material. Yeah, see this, I think he did. This was, yeah, see these were a lot of the charts, some of the charts that I had used, and he goes into some of it more deeply. So he's covering a lot of the same stuff I am, and I've really appreciated what he's done. So check that out. So yeah, so this first clip from my conversation with Nate, I might do one or two more clips. But part of the reason I do this is so that people will watch it on the channel and this video length won't be an hour or two. Now, again, I know a lot of my regular viewers, they see an hour or 2 hours and they don't bat an eye. They just go right into it. A lot of CRC people, they see an hour and a half, like the video I dropped this morning, and they're like, I don't have time to listen to that. For those CRC people, there is an audio-only podcast version of my YouTube channel with no ads. No pictures, but also no ads. There's a link below in the show notes that you can either subscribe to that on your Apple product, or it's actually hosted by Podbean. So if you have Android, you can do that, or you can just use your own podcast app and get at that. So if you don't really want to, if you don't have YouTube Premium and you can't really watch all of this sort of on your smartphone because you don't have YouTube Premium, there is a podcast app and you can listen to it ad-free. All of the audio-only podcasts are ad-free, and a significant number of the people who follow my channel do actually just listen in the podcast app. So now in this first clip, before I got into this, I got into his personal story. I'm not going to clip that out. That's on the full video. It's interesting, but it's not on the full video. The second part, I get into Grand Rapids and Classis Grand Rapids East, some of the unique history of that Classis, and then some of the unique history of Fuller Avenue CRC, which is the church that he pastors, and then also some perspective from someone in Classis Grand Rapids East that they sort of feel on the opposite side of what, if you're way out west or on the periphery of the Christian Reformed Church, the reputation that people sort of easily have about the Christian Reformed Church. He sort of gives a perspective from inside Classis Grand Rapids East. And last week, not last week, it was 13 days ago, 2 weeks ago, I played a conversation that I recorded with my new friend Neil. And I've really grown to enjoy Neil. Neil texts me every day. He sends me pictures of the elk that are destroying his lawn up there near the beautiful Canadian Rockies, which I had the privilege of touring not too long ago, thanks to some Canadian friends. But the reason I host these conversations and I bring them out there, and I hope Christian Reformed people see them, is I want the church to be able to see itself. And of course, the church looks different from the perspective of where you're sitting. So this Canadian CRC truck driver who has his own views about the state of California and the state of the Christian Reformed Church and his own home church and all of that, I really much enjoyed him sharing his views unfiltered. And actually, this I didn't do any clipping of this video, but it was many people. Not a lot of people watched it necessarily, but those who did, a lot of people really enjoyed the video. There's a ton of appreciative comments in there. And I know that this video might be more controversial for a whole variety of reasons, but I want the church to understand itself, and I want us within the church to understand each other. And also, there's some things that he said that I just sort of can't wait for people in this little corner of the internet to listen to, because they're going to be like, well, these are issues I want to talk about. They have very little to do with human sexuality, but have a lot more to do with broader conversations in Christianity and between Christianity and this culture. So I'm sure we'll have some interesting comments with that. But so this first video, and often when I release these segments, I do so intentionally because I want to sort of set up the whole conversation. And Grand Rapids has a reputation, some of it earned, some of it not. And Grand Rapids and the churches in Grand Rapids, as I've said many times, is different from every place else in the Christian Reformed Church. The circulatory piece that Kent Hendricks wrote nicely lays that out. But people in Grand Rapids also have local churches, and they're also doing ministry. And they sometimes see how they're seen and say, you're not seeing us fairly. And often people in the periphery of the Christian Reformed Church look to Grand Rapids and saying, you're not hearing us. You don't understand us. You're not listening to us. And so part of the reason I do these videos is because even if we're going to disagree, I at least want us to understand each other better and to hopefully not straw man each other or scapegoat each other, but at least begin from a place of understanding. So that's where this clip starts from. It's got a nice section. I talk a little bit about the history of Grand Rapids, some of the challenges of ministry there that I know because I lived 10 years of my life in Grand Rapids. My grandparents, both my grandparents on my father's side, both grew up in Grand Rapids. So it's a place that I know, and I have many friends and relatives in Grand Rapids that go to these churches, and so it's not hypothetical. So here's the first section, and again, if you want to see the whole video, it's in No Wait, No Ads. There's a link way down at the bottom here to join the membership if you've got to see it right away. If you have patience to wait a few days, the whole thing will be out on my channel, and you won't have to pay a dime. So here it is. The fact that Southeast Grand Rapids was the area that a lot of Dutch immigrants settled in, and that became very much a Dutch community. So a lot of the Franklin Street campus where my parents went to Calvin is there. And so there are a lot of churches sort of concentrated in that area during the 60s and 70s. African Americans began moving in. Dutchmen started going out into suburbs, Kentwood. And so the churches in the 70s and 80s, a lot of those churches were in a degree of transition, some of them maybe even in crisis in terms of, do we, people who relocated themselves, do we plant new churches out in the suburbs? And there's a whole ring of CRCs that are in more suburban areas. And then a number of churches decided to quite intentionally stay in the community. And then they had to work on answering the questions, who are we now? Do we try to enfold people in the community? Of course, the community was in transition. Many people who go to Calvin and let's say live off campus wind up actually living in that neighborhood too. I did in my years in Calvin Seminary. But again, it's a historic neighborhood. My grandparents went to Oakdale Park when they were growing up, lived at Hall in Kalamazoo. So there's a ton of history there that even if a guy like me who lives way in California and didn't grow up in Grand Rapids, I'm still connected to it.
Yes.
And so then these churches that are still in that area have, these churches have been, in some ways, had a fair amount of, they've had a lot of CRC history that they're steeped in, but they're in some ways, if you would compare them to, let's say, Brookside, which is over by the denominational building in Meyer Thrifty Acres, Paul DeVries's church. So these churches have had really interesting histories, and I'm much more familiar, obviously, with Madison Square. I was an elder there when I was in seminary, and a few other churches. Oakdale I'm more familiar with, but a little bit more familiar with, Eastern Ave and, let's say, Bates or First. Tell me a little bit about the history of Fuller, especially with respect to this transition that many of those Southeast Grand Rapids churches had to sort of figure out.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good summary. So Fuller, we are 99 years young. We next year, 2025, we hit 100. And Fuller's history was that it was a church plant offshoot, new campus, if you want to call it something like that, of Oakdale Park, Sherman Street, and Neeland. In 1925, it was, as the story that I've been told, it was one of the first CRCs, maybe the first CRC in Grand Rapids that was intentional in not having a Dutch service.
Oh.
So when it was built on the corner of pretty much the corner of Hall Street and Fuller, and that was where the dirt road started in Grand Rapids. And so from there, this little congregation set roots really for kind of their immigrant children and for others who might be attracted to an English speaking only congregation. And yeah, like you say, over the years, it's moved from a congregation that was largely just for this neighborhood, a lot of walking. They didn't have a parking lot. When Calvin College was at the Franklin campus, Fuller was 1,200 members strong. They would, in fact, there's stories of sending Sunday school teachers to Madison when it was a chapel.
Yep.
To help serve on a rotation basis of sorts. And so Fuller saw great growth through the 40s and the 50s, post World War II years. When Calvin made the decision to move their campus from that kind of Franklin urban site to a much more suburban
farm.
There you go. Yeah. And when they made that move, that pulled a lot of people out as well. And so that was probably on the early end of white flight. I'm not saying that those were connected, but white flight really followed that. And we have the history here of Grand Rapids is such that I can look across the street right here and see where the red line was for mortgages and all those kinds of things. And yet Fuller was one of those churches. There's probably a little over a handful of Christian Reformed churches here in the urban center of Grand Rapids who said, we are not going to leave. This is, we feel called to this space, to this place. Now, did they do that in a way that would embrace their neighbors well? Maybe not. It might have been more out of a sense of stubbornness and that sort of thing. But to their credit, they stayed. And now we have some pretty great ministries here on the southeast side of Grand Rapids because of that tenacity and that commitment. And so, yeah, I've been here at Fuller now for just over 10 years, and they're a fantastic congregation to be a part of. They love and they try to love well. And that's not to say that on occasion that love isn't awkward, right? We all have extended families where we've got that awkward uncle or that awkward aunt, and you say, yeah, but they love you. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's been the community that I've been able to serve for these last 10 years. And it's been really good.
What's your church look like sort of demographically? What are you worshiping on a Sunday morning? What's sort of the profile of your membership right now?
Yeah. So we worship, I didn't get a count list last week, but I think the week before we were like 140.
Okay.
So we're not huge.
Yep.
Uh, we suffered a bit of a drop around the COVID season.
Yeah.
And so that's to be expected. We're an older congregation, I would say, but we've got an influx too of some younger families, which has been really invigorating. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think we're in a place of being deeply committed to this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Our neighborhood ministries are pretty strong. We just wrapped up a neighborhood nights spring programming session where we ran 8 different classes for all kinds of different people. We're feeding 100 people a week, doing good neighborhood ministry.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a testament to God's faithfulness and to the faithfulness of the community here. So yeah.
Do the members of your church, are they sort of spread around Southeast Grand Rapids? Are most of their ties, let's say, historically to the church in terms of family ties, or is it more the sort of mode of ministry or context of ministry? How would you? I'm sure it's all over the map, but
It is.
What are some of the patterns that you noticed?
Yeah, it is. I mean, right nearby there's a bakery, Hall Street Bakery. It opened right around 2014, and I've had older guys in the congregation who, in their 80s, admit to me that back in the day, that was a little grocery store on the corner there, and it was a really easy mark to steal candy from. And they're admitting this to me over coffee as we sit in the place, and I'm kind of saying I don't know that I can absolve you of that, but I think you're all right. So we definitely have folks like that who grew up on these streets. Before our parking lot was a parking lot, it was a sand lot, and kids played ball there. We also have folks who are attracted to that kind of commitment to neighborhood and commitment to place, and striving to love our neighbors well, and to listen well to the needs, to help capitalize on the assets, and to build relationship all along the way. So
tell me a little bit how. So right now, Synod 2022 and 2023, the denomination is in probably as significant a crisis, if not even more of a crisis than it was, let's say, in the 80s and 90s, when the CRC had been fighting for 25 years over women in church office. Talk to me about how, and you can take it in any way you want to, in terms of how you've come to this crisis, or how, and then maybe how your church sort of sits in this, because for a lot of people watching this who maybe are members of the Christian Reformed Church but not in Grand Rapids, Classis Grand Rapids East as long had sort of a reputation for a variety of reasons, but now probably has a particular reputation, which, because reputations are always, the reality is always way more complex than, let's say, a low resolution reputation. So talk to me about how the current struggle in the Christian Reformed Church, how you came into it, and then maybe, how it impacted your local church. And I mean, take that any way that you think is important.
Yeah. I think we all have a tendency to simplify in order to claim understanding. Right. And I think that has been and an unfortunate consequence of a lot of this debate and conversation. You know, I sit in a Classis that has been painted as a bunch of kind of liberal yahoos, right? And yet, the Classis contains multiple congregations who hold very traditional perspectives. And they're settled on a traditional perspective.
Yeah.
We sit in a Classis with multiple congregations with all congregations, whose makeup is diverse, whose membership is diverse on issues of sexuality. There is no kind of monolithic reality here. And I think one of the real tragedies is that we haven't seemed to slow down long enough to listen to one another, to hear them. And in fact, Paul, it's one of the things that I really appreciate about you and your channel is that, yes, your videos are long, but you slow down long enough to listen. And I think that's really, really important. We haven't done that well. And so sitting in Grand Rapids East, sitting in a church like Fuller that has diverse perspectives on this, has led me and a number of others to try and walk out a way to build unity across these differences for the sake of the mission that we feel called to. And that's sprung out a group Better Together. And we've been trying to walk that out across some denominational lines along the way. But it's a recognition that our reality is much more complex than we're often willing to give it credit. And in some ways, it's also a understanding of it's a wrestling with, right? Christ's priestly prayer in John 17. It's a wrestling with how should our ecclesiology be shaped by our eschatology when we get to a Revelation 7 passage, where all tribes, tongues, and nations are before the throne of God, lifting praise. You know, I haven't watched all of your things, but I've watched enough.
You've not watched all of my videos? There's only about 2,500 of them out there. A lot of them more than an hour long. I don't know what you're doing with your time, but go on.
Oh man! But what I have seen enough, Paul, to see your ecumenical heart, and that really is the bread and the butter of this effort of Better Together. Is trying to say, hold up, friends, this is a lot more complex. And these are people who are genuinely trying to follow after Jesus well. And they're coming to different conclusions. What do we do with that? How do we navigate that? Right? I love your language around a confessional conversation. I think that's really important. I saw your piece just from, I think it was this morning, around trying to understand the analysis of all of this, right? How are we applying these confessional standards at the varying levels of individual and church and Classis and synod? And I think those are the conversations that we're simply not having, because instead we're giving up the complexity and we're settling for the simplicity, and we're missing an awful lot of beauty and opportunity in the middle. So, you know, that's our thing with Better Together is we're really trying to build unity across difference for the sake of mission. That's our heart. That's our hope. I don't know that we've been that successful, but ultimately we're not called to success. We're just called to faithfulness. So